Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful night on Thursday, November November 5th, 2020. Lots happening. So we are glad you're able to take a break and join us on this Hamilton budget information session. And this is obviously hosted by the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, and we have somebody from the city of Hamilton and Environment Hamilton to kind of work work with us through this session. So we have Brian McMillan. Brian McMillan is the director of financial planning, administration, and policy corporate services. Brian holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from McMaster University. Since May of 2013, Brian has held the position of Director, Financial Planning, Administration, and Policy with the City of Hamilton. Brian's team is responsible for investments, debt management, budgets, financial policy, transfer payment reporting, and financial transaction processing. Brian led the team that developed and implemented the city's multi year business planning and budgeting. Brian also has extensive municipal finance experience in accounting services, financial reporting, and contributing to the changes to municipal financial reporting and municipal performance management. So thank you, Brian, for joining us. And our second speaker is Ian from Environment Hamilton. Environment Hamilton is a grassroots organization that was born out of environmental organizing against the red wheel, and since then we've been active in fighting for climate change in Hamilton and doing some great work trying to ensure that when we talk about climate change, we're not just doing it in a preferential way, but more of an actionable item because we know that we haven't been great stewards of the environment, particularly when we talk about it from a settler colonial framework in this country. So, uh, thank you, Ian and Brian, for joining us on this session. And we'll hand it over to Brian so that Brian can talk about what the city budget looks like, what it entails, how residents can get involved, and then that way, if folks have questions, they can just put it in whatever platform, particularly Facebook and YouTube, and we'll be able to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So I'll hand it over to Brian.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to your session today. Hopefully it's informative, and so yeah, a bit of a primer. Kojo and I had a bit of a conversation about what he wanted to see today. So I hope I don't get into too much of the detail that is maybe a little inside baseball. But I wanted to get into some of it, of course, so that you can sort of see some of the process and sort of where we are in our budget process this year. Okay, I will share my screen. Inside. Can you see my screen?
There we go.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So the first few slides, what I want to go through is a little bit of about municipal budgeting in general, and then some of the specifics about the City of Hamilton's preliminary budget outlook and process. Mike Zagaric, our general manager, had a presentation on the preliminary budget outlook to General Issues Committee last Thursday. So some of that information is in here, and I also have a few updates because we're getting close to finalizing our and presenting our rate budget because it's due to committee on November the 23rd. Okay, so the agenda, yeah, municipal budget 101, our budget schedule, the some tax supported historical budgets. Then I'll go through a bit about the operating budget, and then the rate budget historical, and the rate budget rate operating budget preliminary outlook. So regarding budgets in general, we have there's two different types of budgets: operating budget and a capital budget. So the operating budget, it's a financial plan to deliver the programs and services, and then to finance the capital assets with various revenue sources. Capital budget is a financial plan to acquire or construct new capital assets or replace or renew existing capital assets with revenue sources. So this slide is in general about the services that fall under the tax-supported operating budget and the tax-supported capital budget. The picture I put up there on the left is probably familiar to some people. That would be some of our COVID responses. Mayor Eisenberger, EOC Director Paul Johnson, and the Medical Officer of Health Elizabeth Richardson. So they're regularly giving updates on COVID-19. So of course, in this list of tax-supported operating budget services, this is not an exhaustive list. It's some of the things that people would be aware of. So transit, fire, paramedics, the waste collection, disposal, recycling, roads operations and maintenance. We have our buildings operations, the buildings that we own and run programs out of. There's Ontario Works benefits, housing, long-term care, children's services, public health, recreation. We have our building services division, licensing, planning, transportation planning, parking. And then in addition to, we provide funds to the conservation authorities and RBG. And then there's the police and library that are separate boards as well. And then we have some of our administrative type services, which would include customer service and provincial offenses office. And then we have our administration being the city manager's office and some of our corporate services areas, which would be one where I'm located. Regarding expenses, so the expenses that are covered within those operating budgets, we have our salaries and benefits for the employees. There's contractual services for things like the waste collection and waste disposal. There's payments, of course, to participants, service providers, materials and supplies, and then we have capital financing. So in the capital budget, then we have to finance that capital budget when we have debt, and in municipal accounting, the principal payments are considered a cost of service. In other accounting, it's referred to as that's a balance sheet item. Like I said, I don't know how much people want to get into that kind of stuff, but I mean, because we need to raise revenues to cover those costs, it becomes part of the it's part of the municipal budget. And then the revenues, in the case of the tax-supported operating budget, the primary revenue source would be your property taxes. There's provincial grants and subsidies, user fees, charges and fines, and then investment income are some of the sources. So when I say provincial grants and subsidies, of course, that relates to a number of the programs that are in our Healthy and Safe Communities Department primarily. The paramedics is partially funded from the provincial government, about 50%. Long-term care, children's services, public health, as examples. Ontario Works, those are funded from the provincial government. So tax-supported capital budget. So the city is responsible for kilometers, over 6,000 lane kilometers of roads. There's also bridges, and then so in addition to the buildings, like I mentioned in the operating budget, we have to have capital repairs and replacement of those buildings as they age, and the related structure and the networks within those systems need to be upgraded and replaced. So we have buses, other vehicles like the paramedic vehicle, ambulance shown on the side on the left. We have, of course, the vehicles that we own for the waste collection and disposal type activities, and road operations and other operations. And there's equipment, and then in that list is also parks, piers, land improvements, trails, all those kind of fixed asset, long-term assets that the city of Hamilton owns. And typical expenses that would be in those categories would be your design, construction, the acquisition costs in some cases for land or in vehicles and equipment, buses where you're just basically acquiring them, purchasing them. Revenues would be I'm just trying. I'm reading some of the just reading some of those notes there, seeing if any more for me. Revenues would be, in some cases, there would be some development charges, and again we have grants and subsidies, federal gas tax. We could receive dividends from Electra and through HUC, Hamilton Utilities Corporation, and then we have contributions from the operating budget to the capital budget, and then we also have debt that we need to issue to finance those projects. So we also have, so those were tax supported. Then we have rate supported operating budget and capital budget. So there's some pictures here of some typical things that we have to pay for and finance from our rate budget. So those are not in your tax. They're not covered from your tax base. They're covered from your rate supported budget. So typical operating expenditures would be our water distribution systems and inspections, the wastewater collection, stormwater collection, the plant operations. We have wastewater billing that is handled through a contract. We have our laboratory, there's compliance work, there's outreach, and there's probably, of course, there's administration in that as well. And like I said, the primary revenue source of that budget is the user rates from customers, whether they're residential, industrial, commercial, institutional, and multi-residential. And we have various rates for those. And this is, I'm talking municipal budgets in general. So other municipalities, of course, do it the same way. And so there are some other user fees and reserves are used to help finance the operating budget. In the case of capital, there's water mains, sewers, treatment plants, pumping stations, drains, culverts, ponds, water meters as some of the examples of the work that's being done and financed from some of these capital sources. So the typical type of expenditures would be design and construction and acquisition costs. There's many other architectural and those types of demolition, excavation, all kinds of related costs related to construction, I'll call that. And there would be development charges when we have growth-related projects. There would be development charges that are charged and collected to pay for those projects. And we have then received grants and subsidies, just like all municipalities, grants and subsidies from the federal and provincial government. And then we also, you can also, and in our case we finance some of the capital from our operating budget, and we also use debt. So I think the intention is that we save the questions until the end, because I think I've got about 37 slides. A few of them are headers and thank yous at the end and questions, but that's basically, there's quite a few. So we'll save questions till the end, right, Kojo? Yep, okay. So regarding budgets in general, municipal budgets, and in our case, the budgets, the operating and capital, they're guided by our strategic plan. In our last case, for 2016 to 2025, and then our term of council priorities. So, you may be familiar with some of our strategic plan items, but our term of council priorities that have for this term of council 2018 to 2022, things like climate change, multimodal transportation, homelessness and affordable housing, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and then integrated growth and development, trust and confidence in city government, fiscal health and financial management, healthy and respectful and supportive workplace are the key areas there for this term of council. Our city manager, Jeanette Smith, she'll be doing a presentation, I think, to an upcoming General Issues Committee meeting or Audit and Finance and Min Committee on an update on those term of council priorities. So it ties in with the budget discussions, but we end up having them on different days, because I think councilors get into some level of detail on that, and then when we get into the budget discussions, we have the departments highlight some of the linkages between our budget and those and the strategic plans. So that's not any different than other municipalities. That's why I put it on this particular slide as Municipal Budgeting 101. In Ontario, we have a legislative framework being basically a creation of the province. Across Ontario, there's sort of three types of levels of municipalities. We're in a single tier situation. In some of the other parts of Ontario, in Peel, Halton region, Niagara region, to name three. There's a two-tier system of an upper tier and a lower tier, and as you may be aware, Hamilton had a two-tier system until 2001, where we are now in a single tier. So we're governed by the legislative framework that is required under the Municipal Act, and then we also have a number of other legislation that we have to follow in our budget preparations and in our administrative work that we do. Police Services Act, Development Charges Act. There's many acts and regulations that govern the way we do business. When you're preparing a budget, and this year in particular, we want our budgets to be structurally balanced. And what I'm referring to there is with COVID-19, we were reporting in back in April, May, and June that we potentially were forecasting huge deficits, and the municipalities have to present and approve balanced budgets. So we were quite concerned about the impact of COVID-19, and as you may be aware, a number of the politicians, the mayors, and CAOs, the mayors and chairs across some of the larger municipalities were meeting with the federal and provincial government to work on how we're going to help municipalities out across the country. FCM had an effort in that, as did AMO, but also the big city mayors, I think they refer to themselves as now. To come through with some funding for the municipalities, and that was announced in. We received some specific letters for the city of Hamilton in August, and I can get to those or we can talk about that if anybody has any questions. And when we prepare our budget, it's not just a single year. We do multi-year plans. We've always done for a long time capital budgets because of the nature of the capital budget. They're long-term, they're long-lived assets. So we need, you need a plan to sort of say when you're planning on replacing and repairing those assets. So we've been presenting for many years a 10-year plan. There's always extra years in those plans beyond the 10 years that don't necessarily get highlighted, but they need to be on the agenda so that everybody's aware that there are these projects in the out years past the 10-year plan. And in the case of multi-year operating budgets, a number of municipalities, and we implemented that a couple of years ago, where we said, yeah, we need to give council an indication of where the budget is going to go in the next few years. So we go through an exercise with our staff, and we present it to council, and we give them an indication on what services and what revenues we expect over the next. We do the current year and then we do 3 years into the future. And so then when we start this year's budget process, we kind of look at what were we expecting in those multi-year plans, and what has changed. Because often we'll be making assumptions about some of the contracts that we might have had. So that includes our collective agreements with our staff, but also some of the longer term waste collection type contracts and how those might have changed when we would have gone out to tender or request for proposal for those types of projects, or sorry, those types of contracts. So when municipal budgeting 101, so the tax operating budget, property taxes is the intention of this slide. So when we come up with our property tax supported operating budget, that ends up getting approved, and I can share some of that information in a few minutes. But some of the key words and phrases are on this slide. So we come up with a property tax rate, and that's essentially you take your total operating budget net levy, so the amount required from taxes, and then you divide it by the total property assessment. When we present our information, we focus on a lot of cases. We just focus on the residential impact, because that's one of the things that the councillors we like to talk about during the council meeting, and tell them what the residential impact is. But of course, there's more than residential impacts. There's a number of businesses and industry in Hamilton, so there's obviously impacts on them. So we don't just focus on residential, but the residential draws a lot of the discussion. So property assessment, you may be aware that MPAC, so that's the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. I've got a link to their website at the bottom of the slide. So they're the ones who establish the assessed values of the properties in Ontario, and they have a reassessment process that happens every 4 years, and that's when you end up seeing a shift. So essentially, your property value is assessed at a point in time. It would have been 2016, and then that assessed value doesn't change until for another 4 years. So with COVID-19, though, we were supposed to have a reassessment this year that would have been happening right now, or would have been happening, and the information would be ready by now. That was supposed to happen this year, but the Ford government postponed that for a year. I think he, realizing that the amount of work that would be required from his from the MPAC staff and also from all the municipalities across Ontario, so he paused that for a year. So we typically that ends up being a bit of an exercise during the budget process as well. So it's not just the fact that we've approved the budget and we've got authority to here's the amount we need for property taxes. Then we have to look at the assessment or the reassessment impacts, because then it matters about where that money basically if the residential taxpayers then have to pick up a greater share of it than some of the other businesses, because there's rules in the Assessment Act as well about what we can do. There's different property taxation classes, and so there's property taxation policy that we have to follow and implement, and those are discussions that happen at the end of the budget process as we present information and so show where those swings might be. From a municipality perspective, we don't just collect. This is Ontario wide, right? We don't just collect the municipal taxes. We also collect the education taxes. In each municipality, single tier and lower tier, they do that across Ontario as well. And then those taxes get collected and they get sent to the provincial government to be used for education. Next slide. So on the rate operating budget is different than the tax, and it's a consumption based on consumption-based rates. So property tax was based on your assessment. Your water and wastewater and storm bill is based on your consumption. So similar to the property tax rate, in the case of the water rate and the wastewater storm rate, 1 and 2. We take the water operating budget, the net amount needed. We take out some of those revenues that I mentioned, some of those other user fees, and we come up when we need it, and we say, here's what our budget needs to be, and then we divide that by the estimated water consumption. And then when that gets approved and we go and bill it, our structure includes, and other municipalities have similar things. And like I said, even though this is a municipal budget 101, but this is what some other municipalities do as well. There's a fixed charge, and then there's consumption blocks. 1 and 2 is how we have set it up, and we did a rate structure review. I think it was 2013 or 2014, and the idea being with the fixed charge is that even if you didn't have any consumption of water, there would still be some fixed charges in the system. There's a number. It's a huge network, the water, wastewater, and stormwater system. So you would still have some fixed charges even if you decided not to charge out based on consumption. So similarly, there's the water, wastewater, and in our case, Electra is our billing agent to bill out our water and wastewater revenues. I provided a link. So for our latest rates are shown on our website, and then if you also go to our website, it'll take you to a link to Electra's website and some specific policies that we have in place. So now regarding the City of Hamilton, this was part of the request was what is our budget schedule and process. So right now we're coming up to the rate budget, but what has happened in the background for months, and this year is slightly different than what I'll call normal and regular years. Our normal budget process staff would start in May. So our budget typically gets finalized in March, and then staff are right at it in May. But part of that is it's related to the capital budget in particular. So they would have started work, with their capital projects that were approved in the previous years. There would have been work that they've got regarding the condition assessments of their roads, of the pipes, and then they would be getting that information. And if they found out any new information, then they would then build that into their budget. So despite us doing a multi-year capital budget, there's going to be changes to that capital budget because the project costs are either going to change or they're going to find out some new information as things happen. I think at General Issues Committee yesterday, there was a bit of a discussion about the Kenilworth Reservoir and some additional costs that are going to be required to remove some contaminated soil. So here we are, we're in the middle and we're trying to finalize and present our rate budget for 2021. And then that information came in and it's kind of okay, so how are we going to then amend our plan, because it's a big effort to run all this information. So we're having those discussions even today and probably come tomorrow. As they get through and we hope to approve those budgets, the rate budget and the tax capital budget in December, then there's an opportunity, or there's time between that date and when they start going through and starting the next process. So that's what causes our multi-year budgets numbers and the projects that are in them to have to be updated. So our particular schedule, we had our outlook that went to committee last week. Typically, our outlook would go in May or June. Last year, when we took our outlook forward, we had a number of provincial pressures because the provincial government had announced their budget, and then they made a number of changes to the funding to municipalities. So we went into last year's budget projecting that we would have a tax operating impact of about 6.7%, and then council sent us away and said, come on back with some options. So we came back with some options in October, and then over the course of the deliberations between January and March, there was reductions that were made to the budget to finally get it approved. I think it was March 20th last year. So it ends up being a similar schedule on an annual basis lately. Our new city manager, she's working with our senior leadership team and us in corporate finance to look at ways that we can maybe, change the schedule and do things differently. Some municipalities are able to get their budget approved in the before the calendar year ends, and then have it ready for the next calendar year. That has not been the practice in the city of Hamilton. So, we're always looking for ways to improve and do that. Now, part of that, my feeling is that if we had a tax increase that was maybe on the low end, I'll suggest, then maybe the budget could get approved, but it could get approved earlier. So the structure of the process is that right. So we're going to come with the rate budget on November 23rd. We have a second date, December the 1st. Tax capital, November 27th, and December the 3rd, if required. And then we have our user fees, and that goes to a normal, regular General Issues Committee meeting, and that'll highlight all of the user fees that we need to be approved for 2020, the 2021 budget. We had a bit of a discussion about whether user fees would be going up by some kind of cost. I'm not going to call it CPI or inflation, because it would be related to the cost of municipal services. So there's some discussion at General Issues Committee last week about the user fees and the potential increases. Some councillors want to be careful with any kind of increases because of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're still in. The tax operating budget overview, then, that'll be presented on January the 15th. And we have boards and agencies, so the police, the library, the conservation authorities, RBG, Hamilton Beach Rescue Unit, Farmers Market. So they come on those 2 days and present their budgets. We have a transit day, and we've been doing this for a few years. So specifically transit, director talks about transit on that particular day. And then we have a series of departmental budget presentations on January 26th, 27th, 28th, and February 5th. And then the public delegations of the budget are on February the 8th. And then council starts their deliberations on February 11th, 22nd, 25th, and March 1st and 3rd. And as required, dates would get added, and council approval would be is scheduled to be March 31st. So that's basically the schedule. So regarding input from the public, there's a process obviously for those delegations. So if anybody wants to appear, if you go to the City of Hamilton website, there's a link, and then I think you can I think it's, I shouldn't say that. I think it's there already. If not, it'll be there. It'll be there soon enough for a link for wanting to appear. But a lot of people wait to appear until they see what the tax operating budget looks like. So until the document's available in January, you might not be interested in presenting or talking to committee and council until you know what some of the services and the cost of those services are. So you'll watch for that, I'm sure. So next I'm going to get into, and I'm on slide, sure I am, someone give me a number there. 11, okay. So give me a coach, or give me a sec, give me a like move faster or something. If you
don't worry, I'll get you there.
So as far as our so this is some history of our budgets, not a long history, but just so sort of more about some of the residential impacts that we've had over the past 10 or more years. So the 2020, that number is actually, it looks like 3%, but it was 2.9% on that slide. So in the case of the City of Hamilton, our total budgets for the four budgets, right? So the rate supported operating, the rate supported capital, the tax supported capital, and the tax supported operating. So our total budget in 2020 was $2.5 billion. So there's a lot of money. So this is only talking about the residential tax impact. So last year, and I'm talking gross dollars too, right? So when I talk about the tax operating budget last year was $1.572 billion. And we have documents on our website if anyone's interested to see sort of where that money is spent. And it's broken down by department and division as opposed to specific service, right? We've had some discussion about doing service-based budgeting. Some municipalities do that, but that would, we've talked about it, and it's something that we're looking to see whether it would help make the decisions different about the budget. So this just shows some of the so what the increases have been over the various years. In some years, we're lower. So it says like a 10-year average is the 1.9%, and the most recent 5 years is about 2.2%. And then there's all kinds of reasons, of course, for why those increases would be. So we have during the year, so in year, there's reports and motions that come from councillors to implement something or put forward something into the next year's budget process. So we refer to those as council referred items. And then they get discussed during the budget. So a lot of times what would happen is that those types of plans or those initiatives would then get forwarded into the and approved in the budget process. SLT, our senior leadership team, through the general managers of our departments, will also put forward business cases for enhancements to services, right? So it might be something, there's, and a couple of these cases that are somewhat timely, possibly. So there was some discussion last year about snow clearing and adding some additional snow clearing costs, sidewalk snow clearing to the budget. So that would have been something that council asked us to come back on. In the case of living wage, that was a discussion last year and maybe even the year before about moving to a living wage, and then that would have we would have to build that into the budget. And what we typically have is a capital financing levy. So I mentioned in the capital budget, so the tax capital budget, we would fund that from the operating budget. So we had built in for a number of years a 0.5% tax increase. So that would be in your 2.9%, a 0.5% tax increase to support our capital budget. So that's something that we generally assume, and we've made some changes this year just because of the situation about COVID-19. And then boards, and same thing. So boards and agencies would be in those numbers as well. So it's the citywide budget. So when we compare, and we do this right near the end of the budget process, we try to get information from the municipalities that are in some cases right near us. In other cases, it's kind of like what's available. So in this case, we're at 2.9%, and what we found was, and I mentioned earlier, when we do the two-tier municipalities, we have to get information from. We got it from Mississauga, so it's not just Mississauga's taxes. Mississauga taxpayers have to pay for the Region of Peel's services as well. So excuse me. So they were around the 1.5% increase last year. So we go and compare, and not that necessarily sways any decisions by council, but they obviously like to see that. And sometimes there's a number of councillors that then ask us to say, okay, can we look at that and try to scale back and reduce our budget during the budget deliberations. And whatever. And there's various reasons why those budgets would be at those particular levels, right? So, I don't know those, but obviously they present those to their municipal councils and get approval for those budget increases. And for, like I said, for various reasons. And one of the things Kojo and I talked about too was not every budget increase is the same. So when I talk about 2.9%, or when we talk about that to council, 2.9% is the average across all of the city for all of the residential assessment. So we've been doing this for a number of years because the councillors like to see the impact in their ward. So we have information, obviously, for all properties, and this just shows you what the impact is, and it shows you what the average residential assessment is in each of the wards. So, so when you talk about the total assessment in a ward, it's obviously the number of properties that are in there that would make those numbers different when you're taking the total divided by the assessment for the citywide. So, and what we also have in Hamilton, we have a number of services that are ward specific. Transit is allocated by the kilometers driven, and the former city of Hamilton, which was Ward 128, that slightly changed with the ward boundary review from 2018. So the former city of Hamilton has a lot of the lane kilometers, or sorry, the kilometers driven through the transit system. So their cost of transit, could end up being higher. It's going to say, well, it depends on how the math works. So it depends on, and then in the case of, we have some services that are slightly different. So I'm only showing the one slide that was in our report last year. Now I can't see my slide there. So sorry. So we have reassessment and tax policy impact, but we also have specific services that are ward by ward specific. And so some of the fire, and so in this case we're showing urban, including urban fire with transit. There's also other indications where there's rural and urban without fire, or with rural fire, which is a slightly different exercise. So we have to go through those calculations to get those different rates, and that all comes out in the individuals who live in those specific wards and those specific areas would get different tax bills. And then so what I started to say too as well, in the case of the former wards 1 to 8 of the city of Hamilton, they have a capital reinvestment program that was set up, I think it was 2009. And so it's about 1.67 million each, and we had to reallocate that because of the ward boundary shifts. So it's not all equal now. So I think Ward 9 and I'm going to get this wrong, but a few other wards, 14, still have properties of the former city of Hamilton. So there's some funds specifically for what was an infrastructure deficit in those wards that those councillors have to spend. And we do an annual report on that. We send that into Audit, Finance, and Admin Committee as one of our controls in reporting the information and trying to be transparent.
Mm-hmm. Ian, I know he's done a lot on transit in Hamilton, and I did notice that there was a section on your previous slides about area rating. So Ian, can you jump in? I know I said Brian will have to finish his presentation.
That's fine.
But if we can get Ian to just jump in and comment a little bit, Ian might have to leave us. So if we could have Ian jump in and then make a couple of comments on area rating and transit, and there's the transit day of January 22nd. I think Ian has been at some transit day. So Ian, can you jump in and comment?
Yeah, and I think just the one comment I'll make for this is that I think it's important to note that the area rating for transit is a holdover from amalgamation, right? And we've been able to amalgamate several other municipal services, and transit's sort of that holdover. And I'm sure Brian can get into the details of why it complicates things so much, but it ultimately complicates transit planning as well. And I just want to commend Brian and the work that city staff do, because the job that I have within the city of Hamilton is to essentially pressure city council to give people like Brian more work to do, right? And this is an interesting aspect to it that I always find very interesting, in that looking at transit services and looking at how we pay for it, it really makes it difficult to really connect the entire city, and it's because of the way we tax our base. And so, just not to interrupt Brian too much right now to cover on this, I just think it's really important to flag that for a lot of folks who may be getting involved and paying attention to local politics, understanding how we pay for things and how things are done, it can be incredibly important, because you may think driving a bus from the Upper Mountain to Ancaster is easy, but when you start factoring in how do you pay for that bus driver's salary, and once you consider that service changes once it crosses that old border into Ancaster, for example, things get a lot more complicated.
Yeah,
well, I can add to that. So the council set up a transit area rating subcommittee. I think we referred to it as. So we had, I think we had one meeting, and we were probably, I know our the office of the city clerk is asking us if we're going to have another one soon, and when that might be. So we're having those discussions internally about what that would look like. Transit, in particular, during with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's one of those areas that needed support. So countrywide, and in Hamilton's case in particular, because of the lost revenues, obviously, we were, that causes us a bit of an issue when we're, I think we're predicting $25 million is the latest number that we're going to lose in 2020. I'm trying to think, in 2020. So those lost transit revenues, that's a huge impact. And then we're having discussions as well about what are we going to budget in 2021 for those transit revenues, and what do we expect and hope that the federal and provincial government, through the Safe Restart Agreement, if there's going to be funds available for transit in 2021 because of the loss revenue, depending on what kind of restrictions are still in place in 2021. Recalculating the way we allocate our transit between the wards based on kilometers, it might be an interesting exercise in 2021 because I personally just don't know how things have changed as far as the kilometers, what routes have changed. So that'll be an interesting exercise when we get those numbers. We do it on an average. It's not just, we don't just do it for taking last year's kilometers and then spreading it out. But that is an interesting one, and as Ian has pointed out, and if anybody's been to council or committee or listened to it, or even read the read stories online or your hard copy newspaper, it's an area of quite of interest that we're trying to solve, but it's about those. It'll end up being about those shifts across the wards, across the city, and then who pays for what. But as both of you I think have pointed out, right, if service were to be more equal, I'll suggest, then we could have a different model. And those are things that they've asked us to come back with, and we've done some preliminary work in the past on some of those impacts, and it's just a question about the shift between the wards.
And onto the topic of the pandemic as well, it's also so difficult because with regards to the HSR, our ridership has actually climbed up quite a bit faster than other municipalities, which was hard to predict. And so, something like with the HSR installing automatic passenger counters, which makes actual measurement of individual riders much easier. That decision a few years ago to install those counters is going to make the city of Hamilton's job to plan for transit significantly easier going forward than it would have been before that. And while at the same time for council weighing the fact that the folks who are taking transit are doing so because they absolutely have to. So we're talking about an essential service in a lot of ways. And with the Safe Restart Agreement and Environment Hamilton and many other groups across the country, including here in Hamilton, including the Hamilton Acorn, the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, McMaster Student Union and Mohawk Student Association, plus a lot of others, we joined a national call to put pressure on the federal government to provide emergency funding to the provinces, which they then did. And now it's up to the province to determine how that's going to be provided. And some folks might have heard some rumblings about microtransit and things like that. And it's going to be, particularly interesting to see what the province actually ends up proposing to the city, and then how the city is going to have to respond to that.
Yeah. So in the case, we could have a whole conversation on transit.
Oh yes.
And I'm not the expert. I only know what I know. So So we've applied, and you may or may not know. So there's an Investing in Canada infrastructure program, right? So I think we had 9 projects that we put forward to the province, and then the province has to forward those on to the federal government. So the federal government had announced that the city of Hamilton would get $510 or $511 million over 10 years. So they had, whatever there ended up being an intake process. So we've submitted our projects to use up our money. Our cash flow may or may not be different, probably different than what the federal government was hoping for. Those programs are typically back-ended. So in our case, a lot of our funds were going towards the maintenance and storage facility that was planned to be built. So we were looking to spend, I think it was $120 million in 2020 and $140 million in 2021. So we're still waiting for that decision about moving those forward, right? Because if you've seen any pictures or watched Transit Day in the past, the Mountain Transit Center is quite overpacked with buses. So I'm sure soon they're going to have to look at it on whether Transit has been talking about that, but they're going to have to look for an alternative storage location for the overnight storage of those buses. But still, we hope to hear from the provincial government soon on that process.
So thanks, man. So let me jump in again, because I know Ian's time with us is dwindling and dwindling by the hour. So, um, you've outlined these different budgets. I think the one of the key questions would be, so we have a budget, public budget delegation day in February, a transit day. So how do residents kind of impact what the budget is going to look like, and what other avenues do they have, right? Aside from showing up on February, in February, and saying they care about this, they care about that, money is to be invested here. What are some of the other ways? So if we could start with Ian first, and then we'll bounce it back to Brian.
Sure.
Yeah, so Brian touched on it, and he was correct. You can speak to literally any committee of council. Some subcommittees have different rules for them. But I was at yesterday's GIC delegating in response to the climate emergency update, and so was my boss Linda Lukasik and a few others. And really, I think the reason why I'm here is I've delegated on a few budget days and stuff like that. And really, what we in Environment Hamilton have been really trying to emphasize, and I know COJO through HCCI and city staff as well, through the city of Hamilton, is really try to engage with residents and make it clear to them that the tax process doesn't have to be this super complicated thing. Something like what Brian's showing right now from his slide is extremely helpful for helping a resident understand what's going on, where they don't have to comb through a billion different graphs. But more importantly, I think, if someone wants to wait until February 8th of 2021 to comment on the 2021 budget, they certainly can. But a lot of things and a lot of new programs and stuff like that can be started, and the ball can get rolling on different proposals at any time in the year, right? So if you have a comment that's relevant to the budget generally, you can definitely reach out to a committee and apply. So if you go to hamilton.ca, and now it's sort of in the lower right corner, if you scroll down a little bit, it says, council and committee, and you can request to speak to a committee. Now everything's digital, so it's maybe a little bit easier for folks. So typically budget, public delegation day for the budget typically takes place later in the day than usual when committees start. So committees usually start around 9:30. Public delegation day usually starts around 3 or 3:30 usually. So that way,
it might be different this year, right?
Yeah, so
might be 9:30. Might be 9:30. Yeah.
Yeah, but it'll be online, so you can delegate to council from your bedroom. And really, what you can do at any point is just register to delegate to any committee. You select it from a drop-down menu. Now, because we're online, you have to send in your delegation request a little bit earlier than usual, but basically, if you want to delegate on public delegation day, you got lots of warning. And as long as you register 2 days or more before, city clerks are very helpful. They will ask if you have any presentation to communicate, to show to council, and they'll ask that for an advance just so they can ensure that it's ready to go on their system. And then that way, if your computer's not working or what have you, the clerks have that and they can still share that with council. But really, I think most importantly is delegating to council for a lot of residents is seen as this kind of really scary thing. And, in council chambers, it can be quite intimidating where everyone in the two chambers are staring at you from their chairs, and it literally is all eyes on you. But really, the public delegation day is extremely important for conveying to councillors what people's values are. You may not have a specific request or a specific action item. You may not have a suggestion. But council really appreciates, and they should really appreciate, hearing from residents and hearing what residents' concerns are. And let's say if in years past, for example, when, in my opinion, council was really dragging their heels on transit issues. We have a 10-year transit strategy, and in 2017, it was delayed by a year. The reason for that was, not completely council's fault. The federal government was a little late getting a transfer in. And as Brian said, the municipalities have a lot of rules about when they have to submit budgets. But as a result of not approving that year and kind of skipping a year, several months later, we ended up with quite a few hours of missed service. And that was because we hadn't hired new drivers to replace one's aging out, one's retiring, as well as absenteeism, because driving a bus, 40 hours a week or more is quite difficult. And then that was the year that we saw a lot of people delegating about transit because they saw the cuts, or not necessarily the cuts, but they saw what the lack of investment generated. And most of the delegations weren't necessarily about, I want X number of dollars going towards transit. It was about the communication of why transit is valuable to them as a resident. And then that led to council committing to maintain the transit strategy. And they did the following year and things like that. So really, I think just for anyone who's watching this stream or watching a recording of it, I want to really emphasize is, while it's really fantastic to have this background information that Brian's providing, you don't need it to communicate to your counselor. It's their job to listen to us as residents, and then council tells folks like Brian what they want to see happen, and then folks like Brian figure out how to make that work. And so really, you shouldn't be held back by, the idea of what you're demanding is unreasonable. Because really it's our job to let council know what we want to see done, and then council and staff make it work within the budget. Outside of that, of course, you can always email your city councilor and let them know these things. But I find really, and I mean, Kojo can definitely back me up on this as well, I'm sure, is hearing from residents, hearing from someone speaking about what they find valuable or what they want to see continued or increased investment in within their community, is extremely valuable. As we're aware from Brian's presentation, councils want to know what the average increase is going to be for people in their ward. And the reason for that is because people contact their councillor to complain about the increase in their taxes. But if you're someone who sees the increase in their taxes, but understands that, hey, do you know what? The city of Hamilton's actually made some really great strides on implementing a program I really like, or you know what, increasing the amount of money from the tax base that went to the HSR because we had that decrease in revenues is really important to me. That's important for them to know as well. And so while I think, detailed information is always great, I would say don't let that hold you back when it comes to communicating the type of city you want to see to your elected representatives and the mayor. And that's my spiel for that. That's my selling point for why you should delegate to council about the budget. But of course, at the same time too, I think, organizations like Environment Hamilton and HCCI, we try to make it clear to residents what's going on. And, I really thank Kojo and Brian for putting this together and, demystifying the municipal budget a little bit for us.
Yes, and yeah, thank you for your comments. And I think that's one thing too that we're trying to let those that are tuning in and those that watch this later is, whatever their priorities are, they can definitely let council know and go to the budget, public budget day, transit day, all of those things, and tune in to see what is going on. So Brian, I know that you have the 2020 distribution of tax dollars. So this is the average, right?
Yeah. So that's right. So So in the so we show the average residential assessments on the sort of in the bottom left there. So for the average house, with that value, the municipal taxes would have been that $3,689 in the bottom corner. And then, but total taxes, which then would have included education as well, would have been $4,271. So hopefully that $582 in the green. Those two numbers add up to your total taxes. So we typically try to break it down to say, okay, how much of that, what services are provided for those dollars. So recognizing when we talk about things like shared services, I mentioned that earlier, we get provincial funding for a number of our services. So we refer to those as provincially shared services. So 100% of the dollars are not coming from taxpayers. They're in some cases it's 75-25. social services in some cases, the Ontario Works benefits, that's now 100% funded. So that wouldn't show up on this chart. So whatever's left there for social services would be a number of the other programs that are being run. And we might have, like, housing might be in that total actually. So EMS is another program I mentioned earlier, paramedics and ambulance, which is 50% basically funded from the province. And over on the right-hand side, we kind of break down our other city services, and then those area rated services that we talked about: transit, fire, recreation. We have some sidewalk and street lighting type stuff, and that special capital reinvestment fund that I talked about. And then boards and agencies, we highlight police on its own, whereas we put library and the other boards and agencies up just for simplicity up under city services. And what the intention of that is that the police budget is quite large, as probably a lot of you know. So yeah, we try to do this to kind of show where people's dollars are being spent. Did Ian have did you have specific things that you wanted to talk about? Because if you want, like, whatever, if you just you can then cut me off or whatever, because I know you have to get out. You have to leave as well. So let me know. So I might have skipped some slides. I don't know. So our tax competitiveness is one of those things that we talk about, right? So the red bar there is Hamilton, the residential property taxes as a percentage of income. This would have been 2019 numbers. 2020 numbers that we worked through. There's a company that does this survey for a number of municipalities. That's a competitiveness study. It's about taxes and water rates and that sort of thing. So one of the they look at property taxes as a percentage of household income. So we're higher than we're at the high end of that chart. So that could be a combination of the services that we provide compared to some other municipalities, or the incomes that are in the city of Hamilton. So it's a combination of those two factors. And when we look, we present this information to committee and council every year, and we always look to improve that. But in that case, if it's income, it's a slightly different process than maybe things like I'll go back to assessment, right? So when we do our tax competitiveness as a percentage of assessment, and that's per 100,000, we're the gray line there. So there's a 6% difference. So going back to 2012, 2015, there was a 12% difference between us and the average. So some of that would be, so not just how much of the property tax budget is then required for residents, but it's also about your assessment then, right? If you continue to have, if you can get more and more non-residential assessment in the commercial and industrial areas, then these numbers will then change. It's all about the percentages, and and then so you want your businesses that are going to generate some nice taxes to help out across the municipality. And Councillor Marula, some of you may have heard if you listened to council over the years. He likes to talk about that as far as the impact and of the Stelcos and Dofascos that we would have had from years gone past, and they would have helped with our ratios in past years. Okay, so the as far as the split on the revenue side, so property taxes are about 59%. So I mentioned earlier about some of the other, we get grants and subsidies, and the fees in general is and then the others would be things like investment income and that type of thing. So where are the dollars being spent? 51% is spent on employee related costs. So we're and in some services it's a lot more than that. I think in a lot of services it's going to be 70 to 80% of their budget is going to be staffing related. So then some of the other costs would be the agency and support payments. 17% would be your things like I mentioned. Some of the housing, payments to housing providers that the Housing Services Division provides, would be also some support payments for like ODSP and Ontario Works, that type of thing. Our capital financing number, I mentioned a bit about that. So it ends up being 9% of the total. There's contractual costs, and then things that we've just grouped into other. So when we did our multi-year outlook, I mentioned that earlier, we do a multi-year budget, and we started out with a 4.5% tax increase for 2020 at the time, right? So this is our last year's information we presented last year. So it didn't end up at the 4.5%, it ended up at the 2.9%. But we had said at that time that we were expecting a 4.2% tax impact in 2021, and then 2.7 and 2.6 in future years. So there were some specific issues that were happening in 2021 that we had to deal with, that we expected to have to deal with. And then when we did our outlook, which I'm going to get to now, then we're coming in right now at 4% rather than the 4.2%. So things have changed between when we put that multi-year outlook together and to now our outlook that this was basically put together a few weeks ago, and we're going to be spending some time fine-tuning it. So on the average residential $380,300 current value assessment, you're looking at a 4% increase for $146. And council during this next upcoming many months will be looking at something likely lower than that. And we end up breaking our outlook down by, like I said, by our departments, and then also the boards and agencies and our capital financing. That's the initial outlook of the 4%. Those numbers are being fine-tuned now, and we'll be putting that budget book together for the presentation that happens in January. Some of the key drivers initially right now, this is in order of dollars. It's the 17,543,000 is employee related and other miscellaneous things that aren't captured in the items below. So in the items below, you've got some IT equipment and licensing changes. I'll skip over the operating impacts of capital for a minute, but Roxborough Housing Initiative Program. So there was a program that was initiated in housing services. So there's going to be an impact. I think it was about $2 million or $2.1 million for about 5 years, I think. So that is supposed to fall off after, I think it's 5 years. I could be wrong on that. And the curbside waste collection. So there's, we have new contracts in some of these cases. So there's an impact of the 2.9 million, and then down to the organics and recycling processing contracts, 1.5 million. And we have, potentially revenue problems on our recycling revenue problem of $1.5 million about being able to, to sell our recyclables. Changes in provincial funding for children's services has an impact of 1.2 million. And then insurance premiums, we had a report, I think it was in June, May or June, and we expect our insurance premiums have to go up by $1 million. So we're not just talking some kind of a normal inflationary type increase. So those are some of the big draws related to the city departments.
And just
talk about boards and agencies. Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to jump in, and maybe my last point before I have to get off myself, and this is maybe a little my bone to pick with council, but just for anyone who's watching, I think it's also worth pointing out that City Council explicitly decided not to investigate what the impacts of biweekly garbage collection would be. Something that most likely would have reduced the cost of curbside collection quite a bit. And so that was a decision that was made, I want to say maybe about a year ago now, or it feels like it was because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so for folks who are, concerned about things like that, there are decisions made throughout the year that do have impacts on the budget and do come into play. So, I imagine for 2022 budget, we're going to be looking at something very different for the recycling program because of the changes that the province is making to how the blue bin will be paid for. And so it's interesting in a lot of ways. Budget cycle for a lot of residents might seem like a flurry of activity in a few months, but folks like Brian are working year round, and there are changes and decisions being made by not just our city councils, but other levels of government that have major impacts and can fundamentally change how things are done. For example, transit used to be a shared service between the province and the municipalities, and then Mike Harris stopped that. Province used to pay for 50% of operations for transit, and when they stopped doing that, then it became a full expense of the municipality. And so there's still a lot of things that can impact the budget and impact expenditures that may not seem like a big deal at the time, but will have a lasting impact. And, with regards to something like biweekly garbage collection, council's already voted on it to reconsider that. They need a 2/3 vote. So now we have to wait until the next term to really talk about what the potential benefits of that would be. So, just for folks who are watching this, just keep in mind that there's decisions being made all the time that impact the budget, not just during the budget deliberations, although that is when, I guess you could say, the rubber really meets the road.
To add on to that, that's correct. So there's contracts that have different expiry dates, and there's penalties if you want to break contracts, obviously, as well. So there are issues that come up regularly too. Whether in this case that would have been Public Works Committee that rate those contracts, and they would have been making decisions about whether they were going to do an RFP, request for proposal, on that contract, and what the terms of it should have been. So that would have been some discussion and decisions that would have been made probably a little while ago about what they were going to do with that contract when they put it out on the street. So those are exactly those are interesting decisions. And as you mentioned, contracts, so that also applies to collective agreement with staff, right? And that's some of the numbers that are in the employee related and miscellaneous other there, that top line. So decisions are made for all kinds of bargaining units about how much the negotiation and how much council and how much the unions are willing to accept or not accept. So those are the council has a say in some of that on how they direct staff to go and do the negotiations with the unions.
And then, of course, there's always the risk when you're working with a private contractor that they just may not simply deliver the service, and that complicates things even further for council. But on that note, I'm going to have to step away from this call. But thank you so much to Kojo and HCCI for having me, and thank you again, Brian, for working on communicating all these really good information to Hamiltonians, and look forward to working with you both and hearing from you both into the future. So again, thank you again, Kojo.
Thank you, Ian. And for those of you that don't know about Environment Hamilton and the great work that they do, you can please check them out. They just put out a statement about the importance of climate change and what it means to what it what it means to our city and moving forward. So please check out Environment Hamilton.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
See you. That wasn't my house.
Yeah. So we have about 15 more minutes or so. So if Brian, if you could wrap us through, and
Sure. Yep.
and then we can wrap things up and let people know if maybe there might be any questions. There haven't been any questions yet, but if you can wrap us through, and then we can sort out some of the questions.
Okay, yeah. So right. So the next things, and we've got. So I'm on slide 26. So hopefully I'm nearly done the tax budget. So some of the outlook, and this is some of the numbers that we would have for the boards and agencies. So we make some assumptions about what the police budget is going to come in at. We use sort of a 5-year average, and there'll be some discussion about that in the upcoming weeks. Library, we would have used their multi-year budget number that they've given us. Conservation authorities, we're basically telling them to come in at 0, but we're aware of something related to the NPCA where the city has to fund a project with the NPCA because we're the benefiting municipality, and we're writing a report going to committee and council soon. And then some other boards and agency pressures bring that too. But there's some discussion at the GIC budget meeting about the direction to give the boards and agencies. So they came in with that we need to advise the boards and agencies to come in at 0, but they need to explain any increase above 0. So that'll be coming up when they bring their budgets forward on those 2 days that were assigned to boards and agencies. I mentioned about our capital financing. We typically, my note at the bottom talks about our past practice of a 0.5% capital levy increase. or it's about 4.5 million, 4.3 to 4.5 million, depending on our numbers. We recommended that we don't have that this year, and that's due to some of the COVID pressures, and because we're already aware of some other financing, capital financing that we require that I've listed on this slide. When we talked about our COVID related pressure, so we did some rough estimates by department about the impacts, and there's sort of a high and a low impact here on what we might think might happen in 2020, in 2021. If things sort of stay the way they are, then we were looking at like 35 to almost 59, over $59 million. So that's what we're looking at going into the 2021 budget, but that was not factored in to the to the projected tax increase, but because we're expecting that, we're going to get contributions from senior levels of government. So it has a net levy impact of $0. So when we talk about a municipal tax increase, we talk about what a 1% tax increase looks like. So if we want to get down to the preliminary outlook there is in the middle at about 4%. That's so if we want to get down to a 3% or a 2% tax increase, we're going to have reductions to go to $9 million and reductions of $18 million to get down to a 3% or 2% tax increase. And conversely, if those COVID impacts weren't funded by the senior levels of government, we would have a tax increase of 7.8% or 10.5%. So that is obviously unacceptable. So we'll be looking to our senior levels of government to help us out on those estimates. Regarding the rate supported budget, a little bit of history on the rates. The blue line is the amount that's not adjusted for inflation. So that 2021 number should be 4.28%. So the average has been about 4.38% over those, what is that, more than 10 years. So, and then we have this sort of the adjusted for inflation. So it's under those increases as well. But we do that to sort of show that there are inflationary impacts in a lot of the contracts. Then this is an updated slide because we have the 2020 information from some of the other municipalities. So we are at the low end of the amount that a average resident has to pay on an annual basis for their water and wastewater and storm. So we're at 753 projected right now for that's our 2020 number. Our 2021 number will be a different number, but like I said, we can only get information from what's been approved for last year. So the different colors here, the green and the purple. So in the case of there's storm water that is included in some of these some of the water, wastewater, and storm bills in those municipalities, and those are the ones that are in green. The ones in purple, they don't have storm water included in their water and wastewater and water and wastewater bill. I guess essentially that it is. So they're still, in some cases, they're higher. Even if they don't have stormwater included. So then that means that stormwater then would be supported on the tax bill. So even though it's a 4.28% increase, we're looking at $32. So going into this year, so that we were at $752.60 for the average. We're expecting it, if it goes up by the 4.28%, that's another $32.20 that would be required. And I know there's issues of affordability across the city, and so we'll be having that discussion at the rate budget meeting on November the 23rd. So when we talk about that increase, it's driven by the Hamilton Water Division, which looks after the water, wastewater, and storm programs. It's a lot of it's related to energy and other operating costs, but the big piece is our capital financing. So $9.4 million out of the $11.1 million impact is related to the capital financing, and that's because our rate supported budget is heavily driven by capital infrastructure investments that are required to maintain the systems and networks that provide clean and safe drinking water. So that is the end of my slides. So if there were any questions, I don't know if there. I don't know if we're sending some in or.
Yeah, we have a couple of viewers. So for our viewers out there, if you have any questions for Brian, this is the time to send them in. You can send them in through Facebook or YouTube, and then that way we can get Brian to answer those questions. So while you're typing away or while you're thinking about your questions, I have some questions for Brian. So I oh, okay, we have a question. I'll go to the questions because I don't want to uh uh wow, yeah, lots of questions. Okay, let me start with the first question. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just put it up and then that way people can see. So, how much consideration is given when staff make rate recommendations to council of ancillary positive impacts and value adds for Hamiltonians when proposals come forward to raise tax rates? Example: targeted investments in public service leads to a positive impact on social determinants of health, which saves municipalities money beyond the upcoming budget year.
So how much consideration is given? So I mean, yeah. So that's like, so we're pointing. I think I'm kind of it's a bit of a process, right? So when there's additional services or that are going to positively lead to social determinants of health and impact the municipality, yeah, those a lot of the information would be brought forward and costed and presented. So then it's up to committee and council to make the decision on if they want to go forward with that. So going back to the example I raised earlier about living wages, and I think Anthony Marco may have attended one of the GIC meetings in the last couple of years when that's been brought up. I think for the last 2 years. So yeah, so they he can comment on that as well. It's information for them to make a decision on whether they want to move forward with those types of decisions. And there's 15 councillors and a mayor, so it's up to them to make the decision on whether they're going to go forward with that. And then because it's a tax supported service, then it would either be added in or they would look to then maybe reduce some other costs of some other program if it does have a positive impact though. So it ends up being a council decision as he's witnessed the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. So let me follow up a little bit on that. And if you don't have the answer, that's why. So what what if, okay, for example, if there were I don't know, 10,000 residents and they wanted uh X thing to happen, right? Aside from them, sending a delegation request to the specific committee that would be responsible, what does the as a budget department, how do you infuse some of these concerns to what's presented, right? So, for example, we're in COVID, we're living through a pandemic. We know that we need investments in public health. Granted, your slide showed that it's a shared provincial revenue stream that allows you to do public health, but nonetheless, we're in a pandemic. We've also noted that this virus disproportionately affects racialized individuals. We also need to use other forms. I think you said it in one of the strategic planning and council priorities of different modes of transportation.
Right.
You talked about equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? So how is that all matching up to inform some of the increases in numbers. Because I did know that, which is granted, most of it, some of them are related to staffing and budgets and what have you, unions, which are all important, but then
Right.
in terms of the other social impacts.
Right. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good question. So, so a lot of that. So with, there, when council, went through the process to determine the strategic plan and then the strategic priority. So I know there was some initial work being done in the community through our future Hamilton. There was some work being done on the city of Hamilton priorities and even beyond the city of Hamilton, I guess, within the community. So, so any of those discussions, they would be brought forward, and then they would have helped form the council's, the term of council priorities, and then it comes back to councillors then at specific committees and through specific departments working on those initiatives that are going to move the dial on some of those on those initiatives, and and as Ian pointed out, he attended GIC the other day, and there was a bit of a brief presentation about the climate change emergency and the climate change update. So that's how it, in that case, that's how it happened. It's initiative. It was brought forward by someone to make a climate change emergency. Then then a staff team was formed to start addressing those issues in Environment Hamilton. In this case, they've been involved in those discussions with some of the staff, and then so the staff bring that forward, and information goes to our senior leadership team to talk about those issues and how they're going to prioritize those in the upcoming budget. So similar exercises happen on our tangible capital assets or our capital assets that I mentioned. Is that there's only it's only so much money when we talk about that, and so the certain projects have to be prioritized about need and what your service levels are on the condition of those assets. So those discussions start at the departmental staff level, and then we bring them up into SLT, and then bring forward reports and the budget presentations to council, the General Issues Committee budget meetings.
Okay, thank you. We're 2 minutes away from 7:30, so I don't I don't want to keep you here past 7:30. So I want to say thank you to you for spending an hour and a half with us and the viewers for to explaining what the operating budget is, the capital budget is, where the revenues come from, what they are spent on, and also highlighting some of the dates that residents should take note if they want to participate and if they want to get in touch with their respective city councillor and the mayor. I think this is very important, and like I said, I can't thank you enough, because I think sometimes when we're having these broader discussions, we don't see the people behind the work that's being done, and also you having to go through all the different sections with us also brings city council closer to the residents of Hamilton. So thank you for taking the time and showing up. Sometimes people say they will and they don't show up.
Well, if I can throw a thank you for inviting me, Kojo, to this meeting, and yeah, it's not a problem. But I also want to say that so this hour and a half, I guess it was, the so some of this we have some videos on our website as well, right? And we helped put the scripts together for those. It's not my voice. It's a woman's voice, and those are relatively quick and fast. And I think the one video was maybe it might be like 5 or 10 minutes. So if someone wants to go through those videos, and it kind of gives an overview as well of what the budget is. It's slightly a different way to learn. And when we put them together, I thought they were a really good idea, because sometimes when you sit through a PowerPoint presentation, it ends up being a little longer than a nice little short little video that's kind of yes, it was much quicker. I was trying to say that it's cartoonish, I guess, is what it is, right? If
Yeah,
you've looked at it, yeah.
yeah, it's no, they're great. Maybe the other thing that I'll add, maybe it can go to into the 2021 budget, is if they could be done in different languages, then that way,
Oh, okay,
yeah, that way, other folks can kind of take in the information, and they can be shared with the library and the other folks that reach out to community. So I think those are some of the things that we need to do. And like I said, I think it's great that you join us and you share the information. I think that's what our municipal government should look like. And I would also like to thank John Ario for also making that connection. He's the in charge of community initiatives, and I think those are some of the things that we need to see more, where folks like yourself are reaching out to community organizations and talking to other people to kind of bring that information to people. So a big thank you to you, and a big thank you to John and Rio and Pauline for making that connection and making this session happen. So thank you, and
okay,
I hope maybe we can possibly do this again, maybe at the beginning of 2021, so that you can give people an kind of update. And so we'll do that offline, and
sure,
hopefully we'll have you back. So thank you.
okay. All right, thank you. You're welcome. Okay,
Okay, bye bye.
bye.
Yes. So thank you to everyone that tuned in. Thank you to everyone that tuned. Thank you to everyone that tuned in, and we hope to have Brian. We hope to have Brian back on next dates that you have to be conscious of, or make sure you have in your calendar, February the 8th. Other than that, like Ian said, you can go to the city website and send in a request to the specific committee that you want to delegate to, and that's the way that you can join the process of having an influence on the 2021 City of Hamilton budget. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Oh, look, we have people tuning in right when we finished. Nonetheless, thank you very much for tuning in. And this video is recorded on our Facebook page and our YouTube page. So if you missed it, you can go and check those website out, tune in, and listen to the discussion. And we hope to continue the discussion. This is not the end. We'll bring Brian in, and maybe we might even bring some other community organizations in to kind of have this discussion. So thank you very much. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you soon.